Hello guys, welcome to Infinite Stories. Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Let's get into the story. Rose was the golden child in Joseph's life, a young woman full of dreams and charisma. Growing up as the only child of a single father, her world revolved around her dad's strict yet loving care. Joseph had built a reputation as a stern man, known for his unbending principles and deeply rooted values. A respected figure in their small town, he raised Rose to share his outlook on life, emphasizing loyalty, family, and boundaries. Despite his stern exterior, Joseph adored Rose, often expressing his love in subtle gestures. Their bond, though strong, carried unspoken rules that Rose rarely dared to question. Their dynamic was a delicate balance of affection and authority, a silent understanding that her father's word was law. Into their tightly knit world entered John, Joseph's longtime friend and confidant. A widower in his late 40s, John carried an air of quiet charm. Unlike Joseph, who was rigid and reserved, John had a warmth that made him approachable. He was a familiar presence in Rose's life, often visiting their home and attending family events. Rose saw him as a trusted uncle figure, someone who brought a lighter mood into her father's otherwise disciplined household. But something shifted one summer evening during one of John's visits. As Rose caught his gaze across the dinner table, she noticed something she hadn't before, a spark that was subtle yet undeniable. It was the moment that set their story in motion. The weeks that followed were filled with small yet significant encounters between Rose and John. It started innocently, brief conversations about books, shared laughs over an inside joke, and the occasional lingering glance. John, ever the gentleman, treated Rose with respect, though he was increasingly drawn to her vibrant energy. For Rose, what began as curiosity quickly evolved into fascination. She noticed the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, the softness in his voice when he spoke to her, and the depth of his life experiences that contrasted sharply with the boys her age. The more they talked, the more Rose found herself thinking about him, her emotions slipping into a territory she knew was forbidden. John, too, was not immune to Rose's charm. Her youthful exuberance reminded him of a part of life he thought he had left behind. She was intelligent, curious, and far wiser than her years. Yet, he wrestled with his feelings, aware of the delicate line he was walking. Joseph trusted him implicitly, and the very thought of betraying that trust haunted him. Despite his internal conflict, the connection between him and Rose grew stronger. Each interaction carried an unspoken intensity, a pull they couldn't deny. Neither of them had crossed any lines, but the emotional bond they shared was already taking shape, setting the stage for a storm that would soon engulf all their lives. Rose began to notice subtle changes in herself. The once carefree girl who spent her evenings reading novels or chatting with friends now found herself preoccupied with thoughts of John. Every time he visited, her heart raced, and she found herself lingering in the living room, hoping for a chance to speak with him. These weren't fleeting crushes like she had felt before, this was deeper, more complex. She fought to suppress the growing feelings, knowing how inappropriate they were. Yet, the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. She found solace in small interactions with John, treating them as moments to treasure. John, on the other hand, was struggling even more. His friendship with Joseph was built on trust and years of shared experiences. Betraying that trust was unthinkable, but his emotions were getting harder to contain. Every time he looked at Rose, he saw a future he hadn't dared to imagine. Her laughter, her wit, her warmth, it all called to him in ways that left him conflicted. He knew he had to keep his distance, but each time they spoke, he felt his resolve weaken. Both were trapped in an emotional storm, teetering on the edge of the forbidden. One evening, when Joseph was away on a business trip, John stopped by to drop off some tools he had borrowed. Rose opened the door, her heart thudding at the unexpected visit. What should have been a brief exchange turned into an hour-long conversation on the porch. They talked about everything, from John's memories of Joseph's youth to Rose's dreams of becoming an artist. The ease of their conversation surprised them both, and as the sun set, the world around them seemed to blur. In that moment, Rose confessed her admiration for John, though she carefully avoided revealing the depth of her feelings. John felt a wave of emotions crash over him. He saw in her eyes something he had long buried in his own heart, a longing for connection. Yet, he knew he couldn't encourage it. Despite his better judgment, he found himself lingering just a little too long, his hand brushing hers as they exchanged a quiet goodbye. That small touch sent a jolt through both of them, leaving an unspoken promise hanging in the air. It was the start of a dangerous dance, one that would change everything. Joseph returned home, completely unaware of the shift in dynamics between Rose and John. However, Rose couldn't help but act differently around her father. Her guilt, though unfounded in any physical act, weighed heavily on her. She avoided Joseph's probing questions and spent more time alone in her room. Her father, though preoccupied with his own work, began to sense a growing distance between them. He attributed it to Rose's age, believing she was simply navigating the turbulence of young adulthood. Meanwhile, John tried to maintain his composure. He avoided unnecessary visits to Joseph's home and minimized his interactions with Rose. But despite his efforts, he couldn't escape her presence. She was in his thoughts, her laughter echoing in his mind during quiet moments. He began to realize that he wasn't merely protecting his friendship with Joseph, he was protecting himself from a love that threatened to consume him. Joseph began to notice subtle changes in Rose's demeanor. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and her once open conversations had become guarded. He attributed it to growing pains but couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. One evening, as John visited for dinner, Joseph noticed how Rose's eyes lit up when John entered the room. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to stir suspicion. Joseph dismissed the thought, choosing to focus on his long-standing trust in both his daughter and his best friend. For Rose, Joseph's scrutiny became harder to bear. She felt the weight of his protective gaze and worried that her feelings for John were becoming too obvious. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to suppress her emotions. John, too, was aware of Joseph's watchful eye. He took extra care to avoid any behavior that could raise questions, but his efforts were futile. The more they tried to hide, the more conspicuous their connection became. One fateful evening, Joseph walked into the living room and found Rose and John laughing together. Though the moment was innocent, Joseph felt a pang of discomfort. He pulled John aside after dinner and asked him directly if anything was going on between him and Rose. John, caught off guard, vehemently denied any impropriety. Joseph seemed satisfied, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Rose, overhearing the conversation, felt a mix of fear and anger. She resented her father's intrusion but also felt a pang of guilt. She realized the gravity of her feelings and the impact they were starting to have on her family. She resolved to be more cautious, but her heart refused to let go of John. The tension in the household grew, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. Unable to bear the emotional turmoil, Rose decided to confide in her best friend, Clara. She poured her heart out, revealing her feelings for John and the complications it brought into her life. Clara, though shocked, listened patiently and advised her to focus on her future. She reminded Rose of the risks involved and urged her to keep her distance from John. Rose appreciated Clara's advice but felt torn between her emotions and the reality of the situation. She knew what she felt for John wasn't fleeting, but she also understood the consequences of pursuing it. The confession, though cathartic, did little to resolve her inner conflict. Meanwhile, John wrestled with his own feelings, knowing that his affection for Rose was growing despite his efforts to suppress it. A stormy night brought Rose and John together in a way neither of them anticipated. Joseph was stuck at work, leaving Rose alone at home. John, concerned about the heavy rain, stopped by to check on her. What began as a casual visit turned into a heartfelt conversation about their fears, dreams, and the unspoken bond between them. Rose, unable to contain her emotions, confessed her feelings for John. John was stunned but couldn't deny his own emotions. The moment felt electric, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within them. Though they didn't act on their feelings, the confession changed everything. The line between them had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Joseph's suspicions reached their peak when he overheard a late-night phone call between Rose and John. Though the conversation was innocent, the intimacy in their tone was unmistakable. Furious, Joseph confronted Rose the next morning, demanding an explanation. Rose, cornered, admitted her feelings for John but insisted that nothing had happened between them. Joseph's rage was uncontainable. He felt betrayed not only by his daughter but also by his closest friend. The confrontation left the household in shambles, with Rose and Joseph barely speaking. John, caught in the crossfire, faced the wrath of a man he had considered family. The once strong bond between them was now irreparably fractured. The aftermath of the confrontation created a palpable tension in Joseph's household. Rose spent most of her days locked in her room, avoiding her father's judgmental gaze. Joseph, still seething from the betrayal, couldn't bring himself to speak to her without anger boiling over. Every glance reminded him of the trust she had shattered. For Joseph, the pain of betrayal wasn't just about Rose's feelings for John. It was the audacity of breaking an unspoken rule in their family dynamic. John, feeling guilty yet defiant, decided to distance himself from both Rose and Joseph. He stopped visiting their home, which only deepened Joseph's suspicions. However, this distance didn't stop Rose and John from thinking about each other. Both were struggling with the weight of their emotions and the chaos it had unleashed. For Rose, her father's disapproval only fueled her resolve, while John, torn between guilt and love, found himself questioning everything he had ever believed about loyalty and morality. News of Joseph's anger began to spread in their small town. Though no one knew the full story, whispers of a falling out between Joseph and John were unavoidable. Rose noticed the curious glances from neighbors and felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. She didn't regret her feelings for John, but the consequences of her emotions were becoming increasingly difficult to bear. John, too, was not spared from the town's speculation. As a respected member of the community, he found himself under scrutiny. People noticed his absence at Joseph's home, and while some were bold enough to ask questions, John remained tight-lipped. Despite the growing tension, his thoughts always returned to Rose. He knew he couldn't avoid her forever, and the idea of being completely cut off from her left a hollow ache in his chest. Clara, Rose's best friend, decided to intervene. She visited Rose and tried to talk some sense into her. Clara believed that Rose's feelings for John, while genuine, were leading her down a dangerous path. She reminded Rose of the life she could have, the opportunities, the dreams, and the bright future she had always talked about. Clara pleaded with her to let go of her infatuation with John for her own good. Rose, however, was resolute. She argued that her feelings weren't just a passing crush, they were real and deep. For the first time in her life, she felt understood by someone who saw her as more than Joseph's daughter. Though Clara left frustrated, her words lingered in Rose's mind, planting seeds of doubt about whether she could truly hold onto John in the face of so much adversity. Despite their efforts to stay apart, Rose and John found themselves drawn to each other. One evening, Rose managed to sneak out of the house and meet John at a quiet spot by the river. The reunion was bittersweet. They were relieved to see each other but couldn't ignore the growing complications of their relationship. John, guilt-ridden, tried to push Rose away, insisting that their connection was impossible. But Rose's determination only strengthened his resolve to protect her from the fallout. As they sat under the stars, they realized that their feelings were not something they could simply turn off. Yet, both knew that their love came with a heavy price. In an attempt to clear his conscience, John wrote Joseph a heartfelt letter explaining his side of the story. He admitted to caring deeply for Rose but assured Joseph that he had not betrayed their trust in any physical way. John apologized for the pain he had caused and promised to step away from their lives if that was what Joseph wanted. When Joseph received the letter, his emotions were conflicted. He appreciated John's honesty but couldn't bring himself to forgive him. To Joseph, the emotional bond between John and Rose was a betrayal of the highest order. He tore the letter into pieces, vowing never to let John back into his life. Joseph confronted Rose once more, this time with an ultimatum. He demanded that she sever all ties with John and focus on rebuilding their father-daughter relationship. Rose, feeling cornered, refused to comply. She argued that she was old enough to make her own decisions and accused her father of trying to control her life. The argument escalated into a shouting match, with both sides refusing to back down. Joseph's anger turned into heartbreak as he realized that his little girl was slipping away from him. For Rose, the fight marked a turning point. She knew that her decision would cost her dearly, but she couldn't let go of the one person who made her feel alive. As the tension between Joseph, Rose, and John grew, the townspeople began to take sides. Some sympathized with Joseph, believing he had every right to be angry. Others sided with Rose, arguing that love was unpredictable and couldn't be controlled. The controversy turned into a topic of gossip, leaving Rose feeling more isolated than ever. John, too, faced the brunt of the town's judgment. His reputation, once untarnished, was now under question. Despite the social backlash, he remained steadfast in his feelings for Rose. He avoided public places, choosing to keep a low profile while figuring out his next move. Joseph's frustration reached a boiling point when he discovered that Rose had been sneaking out to see John. Furious, he confronted her and accused her of betraying everything he had taught her. Rose, equally angry, fired back, accusing Joseph of being unwilling to understand her feelings. The argument ended with Joseph declaring that she was no longer welcome in his home if she continued down this path. Rose, devastated but determined, packed her belongings and left. She sought refuge with Clara, who reluctantly agreed to help her. For the first time in her life, Rose was truly on her own, and the weight of her choices began to sink in. Living away from her father gave Rose a chance to reflect on her choices. While she missed the comfort of her home, she couldn't deny the relief of being free from Joseph's judgment. She continued to see John in secret, but the strain of their circumstances began to take its toll. John, too, felt the pressure. He struggled with the knowledge that his love for Rose had torn apart a family and fractured his own life. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to let her go. They clung to each other, finding solace in their shared pain and determination to make their love work. Clara, seeing Rose's struggle, decided to reach out to Joseph. She believed that the only way to resolve the situation was through open communication. Clara pleaded with Joseph to reconsider his stance, reminding him of the bond he once shared with Rose. Though reluctant, Joseph agreed to meet his daughter and attempt to mend their relationship. The meeting was tense, with neither side willing to fully forgive the other. However, it marked the beginning of a fragile truce. Joseph made it clear that he would never accept Rose's relationship with John, but he was willing to rebuild their father-daughter bond, on his terms. For Rose, it was a bittersweet moment, a step forward but far from the resolution she had hoped for. The fragile truce between Rose and Joseph brought a glimmer of hope. Rose began visiting her father's house occasionally, though their conversations remained strained. Joseph avoided any mention of John, while Rose refrained from discussing her feelings. Despite the tension, these moments were a step toward rebuilding their relationship. Deep down, Rose hoped her father would one day accept her choices, but she knew it was a distant dream. Meanwhile, John's life continued to unravel. He found himself increasingly isolated, with only his memories of happier times keeping him grounded. The pressure of their forbidden love began to weigh on him. Though he cherished Rose, he couldn't shake the guilt of having fractured her relationship with her father. He resolved to give her space, believing that distance might heal the wounds he had unintentionally caused. Rose decided to channel her emotions into something productive. She enrolled in an art program at a nearby college, hoping to create a fresh start for herself. Art became her sanctuary, a way to express the tumultuous emotions she couldn't put into words. Her professors noticed her talent, encouraging her to explore her unique perspective. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose beyond her love for John. Joseph, seeing Rose's renewed focus, felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He was proud of her accomplishments but struggled to reconcile the fact that her newfound independence had come at the cost of their bond. He kept his distance, unsure of how to bridge the growing gap between them. Fate intervened when Rose and John crossed paths at the town market. Though their meetings had grown infrequent, the spark between them was undeniable. They spent hours talking, catching up on the parts of each other's lives they had missed. John was captivated by Rose's passion for art, while Rose was moved by John's unwavering belief in her potential. Their connection reignited, but this time, they approached it with caution. Rose was determined to balance her love for John with her own ambitions. John, too, vowed to support her dreams, even if it meant stepping back from their relationship. They parted ways with a renewed sense of hope, though the future remained uncertain. As Rose's visits with John became more frequent, rumors began to swirl once again. The townspeople, never short of opinions, questioned Rose's character and John's integrity. Whispers of scandal reached Joseph's ears, reigniting his anger. He confronted Rose, accusing her of disregarding their family's reputation. The argument escalated, with Rose defending her right to live her life as she saw fit. She reminded her father that she was no longer a child and demanded his respect for her choices. Joseph, unwilling to budge, declared that her actions would forever stain their family name. The confrontation left them both emotionally drained, pushing their fragile relationship to the brink. Feeling the weight of her father's disapproval and the town's judgment, Rose turned to Clara for support. However, Clara, frustrated by Rose's refusal to let go of John, revealed her own doubts about their relationship. She argued that Rose was jeopardizing her future for a man who could never truly make her happy. The conversation left Rose feeling betrayed and isolated. Clara's words, though harsh, forced her to confront the realities of her situation. For the first time, Rose began to question whether her love for John was worth the sacrifices she had made. Despite her doubts, her heart refused to let go of the connection they shared. Joseph, alone in his study one evening, found himself reflecting on his life. He thought about the years he had spent raising Rose and the sacrifices he had made to ensure her happiness. He realized that his anger stemmed not just from her relationship with John but from the fear of losing the daughter he had worked so hard to protect. Though he couldn't bring himself to forgive her, Joseph began to see that his rigid stance might be pushing her further away. He resolved to find a way to reconnect with Rose, even if it meant setting aside his pride. However, the thought of accepting John into their lives remained unthinkable. John, sensing the growing strain on Rose, wrote her a heartfelt letter. He expressed his love for her but also acknowledged the pain their relationship had caused. He encouraged her to pursue her dreams and promised to step back if it meant her life would be easier. John's words, filled with both love and sacrifice, brought Rose to tears. Rose realized the depth of John's feelings and the lengths he was willing to go to support her. Though she appreciated his gesture, she couldn't imagine a life without him. The letter solidified her resolve to fight for their love, no matter the cost. Joseph, desperate to regain control, issued Rose an ultimatum: end her relationship with John or face permanent estrangement from him. He believed that forcing her hand would bring her back to her senses, but the demand only pushed Rose further away. Rose, heartbroken, realized that her father might never accept her love for John. She pleaded with him to see her side, to understand that her feelings weren't a rebellion but a genuine connection. Joseph, unmoved, stood firm, leaving Rose with an impossible choice. Feeling suffocated by the constant battles, Rose made the bold decision to leave the town. She believed that distance would give her and her father the space they needed to heal. With John's support, she moved to the city to pursue her art career. The move was bittersweet, marking both a new beginning and the loss of the life she had known. Joseph, upon hearing of Rose's departure, was overcome with a mix of anger and sorrow. He felt betrayed yet again, but deep down, he knew his actions had driven her away. He resolved to focus on his own life, though the void left by Rose's absence was undeniable. In the city, Rose flourished. Her art gained recognition, and she began building a name for herself in the creative world. Though she missed her father, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. John remained a constant presence in her life, supporting her dreams while navigating his own path. Back in the town, Joseph struggled with his pride. He missed Rose deeply but couldn't bring himself to reach out. The pain of her absence was a constant reminder of the rift he had helped create. Both father and daughter lived in the shadow of their choices, each yearning for reconciliation but unsure of how to bridge the gap. Rose's art career continued to blossom in the city, and her talent attracted gallery owners and collectors. Each painting reflected a piece of her soul, often inspired by the turmoil and love that shaped her life. Though she achieved success, a part of her heart remained tethered to her father. She often painted scenes of her childhood home, longing for a reconciliation that seemed impossible. John, seeing Rose thrive, felt both pride and unease. He worried that their love might hinder her growth, even though she insisted otherwise. Their relationship deepened, but they kept it private, aware of the judgment it would invite. Despite their happiness, the shadow of Joseph's disapproval loomed over them, a constant reminder of the cost of their love. Joseph, in moments of loneliness, began drafting letters to Rose. In these unsent letters, he poured out his thoughts and regrets, grappling with his inability to forgive her. He longed to see her again but felt that reaching out would mean admitting defeat. Each crumpled draft was a testament to his inner conflict, a battle between his love for his daughter and his wounded pride. Unbeknownst to him, Rose had also been writing letters she never sent. In her messages, she begged for understanding and forgiveness, hoping to rekindle the bond they once shared. Both father and daughter were trapped by their stubbornness, unable to take the first step toward reconciliation. Clara, watching from afar, decided enough was enough. She visited Joseph, confronting him about his refusal to forgive Rose. Clara reminded him that life was fleeting and that his stubbornness was robbing him of precious moments with his daughter. Her words struck a chord, though Joseph dismissed her outwardly. Later that evening, Joseph found himself reflecting on Clara's advice. For the first time, he considered the possibility of letting go of his anger. Yet, his resentment toward John remained a barrier he couldn't overcome. The idea of accepting their relationship felt like betraying his own principles, leaving him in a painful limbo. News reached Rose that Joseph had fallen ill. Though the details were scarce, Clara urged her to visit her father before it was too late. Rose wrestled with conflicting emotions, fear for her father's health and anxiety about seeing him after so long. Ultimately, her love for him won out, and she decided to return to the town. When Rose arrived, the sight of her father's weakened state broke her heart. Joseph, surprised to see her, masked his emotions with a cold demeanor. Their interactions were brief and strained, but beneath the surface, both were overwhelmed by a mixture of love and regret. During her stay, Rose visited old family friends who had remained loyal to Joseph throughout the ordeal. To her surprise, they encouraged her to mend things with her father. One of them, an elderly neighbor named Margaret, shared stories about Joseph's struggles since Rose's departure. Margaret revealed how deeply Joseph missed Rose, despite his refusal to admit it. She urged Rose to be patient, assuring her that time and persistence could heal the wounds between them. Rose left the conversation with a renewed sense of hope, though the path ahead still seemed daunting. One evening, Rose found Joseph sitting by the fireplace, lost in thought. Summoning her courage, she approached him and asked if they could talk. Joseph, reluctant at first, finally agreed. The conversation was raw and emotional, with both airing their grievances and expressing their pain. Though Joseph stopped short of forgiving Rose, he admitted how much he missed her. Rose, in turn, acknowledged the hurt she had caused but pleaded for her father to see her as an independent woman capable of making her own choices. Their dialogue was a small step forward, a crack in the wall that had divided them for so long. News of Rose's return spread quickly, reigniting old gossip. The townspeople speculated about her relationship with John and whether she had reconciled with her father. Rose ignored the whispers, focusing instead on rebuilding her connection with Joseph. John, hearing of Rose's return, considered visiting her but ultimately decided against it. He didn't want to jeopardize her progress with Joseph. Instead, he sent her a letter of encouragement, expressing his unwavering support and love from afar. Rose cherished the letter, finding strength in John's words as she navigated the fragile relationship with her father. Tensions reached a boiling point when Joseph discovered Rose reading John's letter. Enraged, he accused her of disrespecting him once again. Rose, no longer willing to tolerate his outbursts, stood her ground. She reminded him that her love for John didn't diminish her love for her father and that his inability to forgive was tearing their family apart. Joseph, overwhelmed, stormed out of the house. For hours, he walked through the town, grappling with his emotions. By the time he returned, he found Rose waiting for him. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her resolve was unwavering. She told him she wouldn't abandon her love for John but desperately wanted her father's acceptance. Joseph, unable to reconcile his feelings, made a final decision. He told Rose that while he couldn't stop her from living her life, he would never accept her relationship with John. His words were like a dagger to Rose's heart, but she realized there was nothing more she could do. Rose left her father's house the next morning, heartbroken but at peace with her decision. She knew she had done everything in her power to mend their relationship, but her father's pride and pain were obstacles she couldn't overcome. As she boarded the bus back to the city, she vowed to carry forward, even if her heart ached for the bond they once shared. Back in the city, Rose threw herself into her art, channeling her pain into her work. Her paintings, now deeply emotional and raw, garnered even more attention. She became a rising star in the art world, though the void left by her father's estrangement remained. Joseph, back in the quiet of his home, found himself haunted by memories of Rose. Though he stood by his decision, he couldn't shake the feeling of regret. Both father and daughter carried their pain in different ways, their love for each other buried beneath layers of pride and stubbornness. In the end, life continued. Rose and John remained together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Though Joseph never forgave his daughter, his love for her never waned. Their story was a testament to the complexities of love and family, a tale of sacrifice, resilience, and the unyielding hope for a reconciliation that might one day come. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this amazing story? Please leave a like and subscribe for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.